Hello and welcome. Greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at SecureIT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Week in Review. It's Friday, so again, that's our Week in Review time. Every week, our team here at the Offensive Security team at SecureIT 360 is tracking, researching, and analyzing threats and vulnerabilities and exploits and techniques and all that good stuff with the purpose of keeping you up to date on what's relevant and important in the industry this week. So hopefully you can be more prepared today than you were yesterday to protect your organization. This time you've got myself, Spencer, and the new guy, Victor. And today we are talking about a couple different stories. We're going to be talking about the rise of LNK malware. We're going to talk briefly about LockBit 3.0 and how they continue to expand upon their arsenal and strategies. And we'll be talking about the CISA news that the PwnKit exploit or vulnerability is being exploited in the wild. So 3 stories today. It's going to be a fairly short episode. We want to keep it tight, compact, and information worthy for you folks today. So the first story that we wanted to talk about was the rise of LNK malware. So there's been a number of researchers that have done some good investigations into this. Since Microsoft is starting to lock down macros, and they've announced that they're going to be locking them down more in the future, threat actors are kind of prepping themselves for that inevitable collapse of maldocs for initial access. Now, we suspect this will always be a technique for initial access, but to some extent, it will probably be limited. So threat actors are moving to other methods, right? They're kind of trying to get ahead of the game. So LNK files is their attempt to do that. And it seems to be that LNK files are the new hotness right now. There's a number of different groups using this technique. And essentially what this looks like from an infection chain standpoint is a user receives an LNK file, which is just a shortcut file. So you click the shortcut file and it'll open up an application, or it can bring you to a folder. Well, it can also execute commands. You can execute commands through PowerShell, or you can use it to execute things like run DLL32. So a user receives a link. It's usually in an email, right? Some sort of attachment or something. The user opens it up. They click that LNK file. That LNK file is modified to look like a document or a folder or an application, like I said. And the target attribute of that LNK file contains some sort of PowerShell command or some sort of command to run or execute run DLL32 to launch something. So upon clicking that LNK file, in this example that McAfee uses in the article, there's a couple examples that they use, but in one of the examples for Quackbot or CACBot, however you like to say it, they like to call PowerShell. So what they'll do is they'll run PowerShell to download their Quackbot DLL and then execute it with regserve32 or regsvr32. So this is a kind of a convenient way to get some execution on a host. This is used to not only launch malware, so launch in it like a stage 1 kind of thing, or launch that Quackbot malware. It's also used for persistence. We've seen this being used with the Folina vulnerability, dog walk, you name it, all those funny names for those things. But the good news is there's some good detection opportunities for this. There's some good ways to mitigate this. You can look for, if you have the event logging turned on, you can look for things like users clicking on those files or those processes launching, specifically suspicious PowerShell. You can look for things like execution of run DLL32 or regsvr32 with some specific command line arguments, or when it gets launched from suspicious locations. So there is ways to detect this. And furthermore, a good strategy would be to block zip files on your email filters, right? A lot of these files come through attachments. that are archive files, like zip files or ISO files, which is a disk image. So an ISO file contained within a zip file. So there's a number of different strategies and techniques with this and variances to this technique. But the good news is there are ways to detect this and prevent some of this. And of course, having good, strong EDR and good monitoring is going to help as well. But kind of the point here is attackers are continuing to adapt. They're continuing to try new things. And, when they find something that works, they'll stick with it. So that's our opportunity to figure out ways to detect these things and prevent them. Cool. So that was the first kind of topic, first story I wanted to bring up because I think LNK malware, like I said, it's the new hotness and it'll be around for a while. The next story that we wanted to talk about is has to do with LockBit. So LockBit 3.0 was recently announced, and kind of the newsworthy, some of the newsworthy things with this was that they launched their own bug bounty program. And what I think is interesting is their bug bounty program includes things like website bugs, doxing, and even sensitive information, or PII. So they'll pay you for PII on high-profile individuals. They'll pay you for security exploits, 0 days and things like that. So quite interesting. I don't know if we've ever seen something like that, or a ransomware group or just a threat group has announced they'll pay people for certain things. It's common to hear groups pay for access to companies. They'll pay you, or supposedly pay you, if you give them your password for your company account, your domain, your company network, right? So I've seen that before, but this is just another group continuing to adapt. We've seen ransomware groups change the malware that they use, or the language that they use to develop their malware. Like we talked about last week, in the weeks previously, there are threat actors using NIM and Rust in different languages. Well, ransomware groups are now offering bug bounty programs. So that is a thing. It's just an indication to me that ransomware is still alive and strong. Extortion is still alive and strong. And, we have to go back to some extent, go back to the basics, the blocking and tackling, like Brad would say if he was here. And, making sure that we have some of those basics in place to prevent some of these things. But that was the main newsworthy thing for me with this LockBit announcement, is they're now going to pay people and individuals for PII and exploits and things like that. The last story that I thought was interesting that maybe we'd like to talk about is the PwnKit exploitation, or exploit vulnerability. So CISA released an article, or released an announcement this week that PwnKit was being exploited in the wild. And for those unfamiliar, PwnKit is being tracked, was being tracked, or is, as CVE 2021-4034. And it's a local privilege escalation vulnerability in PwnKit, which is a utility, PwnKit's PK exec utility. Now, this one is interesting because I've used this on CTFs before, and is very popular on CTFs because it's a fairly reproducible and stable local privilege escalation vulnerability. So when you go through and you're learning local privilege escalation on Linux, for example, this can be used on a wide range of Linux operating systems, and it can get you kind of a free win on Hack the Box or things like that when you come up against older Linux operating systems, just simply because they haven't been patched on that Hack the Box machine yet, right? So this is something that came out. This is a vulnerability that was announced last year and released, but according to CISA and other agencies, they've begun to see more widespread exploitation of this in the wild. So obviously, patching systems is important, making sure you have good patch management Linux systems, which is a little bit harder than Windows. It's common to have a patch process for Windows machines. It's common to go into organizations and for us to see, Avanti or whatever the software is for patching, and to see those get rolled out pretty regularly on Windows machines. It's a little bit harder, I think, for Linux machines. It's a little bit harder of a process for organizations to handle, patching Linux machines. But it is still important. We're seeing a number of threat actors and threat groups target Linux specifically because there's traditionally not as good security products installed. There's traditionally not as good monitoring installed there. And there's traditionally weaker patch management on Linux systems. So, we fully expect Linux to become more and more of a target as time goes on, as ransomware groups start to develop more ransomware for Linux, as threat groups start to develop more exploits for Linux. We will see that continue to go up in terms of exploitation and continue to be a pretty sizable target. So that's really it. That's all we had for this week's Week in Review. Again, it's a short episode. We have the new guy, Victor, starting, who's going to be taking on some of the role here at Secure IT 360 and helping us with threat intel and bringing some of that research and analysis to you folks. So that's all we have today. If you enjoyed this episode, if you got value out of this, we please would love it if you'd share it with your network of folks, with your colleagues and friends. Give us a rating on your favorite podcast app, a thumbs up, like, whatever the kids are doing now. Subscribe, all that fun stuff. It helps us get more visibility, helps us share this news and information with everybody. And you can check out our blog at offsec.blog. And with that, thanks everybody. Have a great day and have a happy, safe 4th of July weekend. So see you, everybody.